Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz, and on the stand right now is Grant Fredericks. He's the video analyst. This is the case of Roy Oliver out of Texas, 2017 case where an officer is accused of murder of a 15-year-old boy. This video analysis is key. There he is on the screen. That's his picture of Roy Oliver. He was a straight-A student. He was into sports. He was a good kid. He was a passenger in a car full of teens leaving a party. Really sad set of facts. And now the questions come down to intent here and whether or not it was reasonable for the officer to respond the way he responded under the circumstances of that night. Not whether it was right or wrong, but whether or not it was reasonable. So right now we're hearing testimony from the video analyst, Grant Fredericks, and he gave a couple key opinions that are notable. The first one is that the vehicle was steered away from the officer. This is Officer Gross and Oliver before the shots were fired. And then the second thing is that he was behind the vehicle. With me is Francey Hakes. We've been on together many times now, former federal prosecutor. Francey, we have to go to break in less than a minute, but I want to get your thoughts on this. I mean, we're watching this video over and over, and we just heard an expert give some pretty key, solid, conclusory prosecution opinions. How do you think the jury's taken this?
Well, Carissa, this doesn't look good for former Officer Oliver. It certainly looks as though his statements after the shooting were wrong. The car was not backing into or moving towards his fellow officer. It was
actually moving away, right? That's what he said. It was moving away, that it was steered away and moving away.
That's right, and that's going to be key evidence for the jury to decide what state of mind Oliver was in at the time.
Right. Okay, we are going to have to go to a quick break, but we're going to continue to follow this closely. Gavel to gavel, as Bob Bianchi said before I took the set. So stick with us. We will be right back. That is Grant Fredericks on the stand right now that you see with that live shot. He is on cross-examination and he is being grilled on his analysis of the video of what happened. He did say some two key things. The first thing is, on direct, he gave an opinion that the vehicle was steered away from him and from the officers and moving away from the officers, but he would not give an opinion on cross on whether or not it was reasonable to fire those shots under the circumstances. With me is Francey Hakes. She's a former federal prosecutor. I'm a former prosecutor myself, so let's see if we can differ on opinions here. We're going to take the same side. What do you think? Is this reasonable or is this excessive force?
Well, Carissa, we're getting a fuller picture of the facts, and you can't look at any police-involved shooting in a vacuum. And here, while the initial facts sound terrible, where this expert testified that the police officer might not have been justified in firing the shots because the car, as opposed to what he earlier had said to police, the car wasn't moving towards his partner, but actually away from his partner. So those facts seem damning. However, Carissa, when you look at the context of this and you watch that full video, you've got 12 shots fired coming from where the police don't know because they're inside the house. Then there's running and screaming.
Right. And just notably, those 12 shots that were fired before were they were from a gang across the street by a nursing home.
That's right.
And
that's
on top of that, they had about 200 or more kids or high schoolers swarming around a house at a party late at night when the lighting was bad. So those circumstances need to be considered on whether or not this was reasonable or not, and there was an imminent threat or not.
They do, Chrissy. You're absolutely right about that. However, you've got to understand police and their knowledge of gang activity. If they thought this was a gang shooting and there was some possibility that Oliver thought that there was a drive-by shooting, and that's what those 12 shots were, then you've got a car that is not following police orders to stop when he says it.
But then again, let's not forget there's context in this case of this is a white officer shooting into a car full of black teenage kids, and this white officer has a history of being racially motivated and of using swastikas in the past. All of that is context for this case that the jury needs to consider, right?
Of course, they absolutely need to consider that context, Carissa, but of course it's night and it looks pretty dark. I don't know if
I know, and that video is not great. We have to take a quick break. We're going to come back and dissect this more, so stick with us, and we have more of that video evidence and more live testimony in the courtroom. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. We're following closely the Roy Oliver case out of Texas. This is the trial where an officer is accused of murdering in 2017 a teenager, a 15-year-old. What specifically happened is the former police officer was called to a house party where there was some ruckus and some shootings happened across the street, some gang-related shootings. Now the question is when the officer shot into the car full of black teenagers, a white officer, the question is that racially motivated? Is it excessive force? Or was it reasonable under the circumstances that this teenager unfortunately died? We're going to go back into court where we have a live feed. Right now on the stand is Grant Fredericks. He's a video analyst. Remember, this entire shooting was caught on a body cam. Let's take a look. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz, and you're listening to Grant Fredericks on the stand, and he is talking live, as you can see, and watch him, and we are going to dissect what he's saying. Right now, on cross-examination, one thing that he said, he's the video analyst, one thing that he's talking about that's key is that the camera, the body cams, are not top of the line, and that there's actually a delay in the video and in the image, and that could actually mean that what the jury sees is not exactly in line with the time frame of the moments leading up to the killing, which is important because the moments leading up to the killing is what's going to determine what's reasonable and what's not. It's not about what's right and what's wrong, but what's reasonable and what's not. Francey, I wanted to give you the opportunity to let us know and your thoughts on this. Obviously, we can't see how the jury is taking this information. I don't know if they are processing it or if they think it's boring or if they understand the cross-examinations tactics in trying to poke holes in, or the defense tactics in trying to poke holes in the prosecution's case. What do you make of all this?
Well, Carissa, I think the defense attorney is actually doing a masterful job of losing the jury in the minutia of technical evidence that really doesn't mean what he's going to tell the jury that it means, with the frame rates and the inconsistent quality. And it's not like it is when we watch TV. He's going to make it seem like when the video analyst opined about what we're seeing when, he might have been wrong because of all these technical flaws that he's had to admit to on the stand. You
know when it's probably going to come together for the jury is when at the end, if he's given the opportunity at the end to give a conclusory statement like he did with the prosecution's direct, what are your opinions? And in the prosecution's direct, he had two opinions. That will be the key thing in cross-examination. We need to take another quick break, but we'll be right back in the courtroom after just a few moments. This police officer, Roy Oliver, is on trial for the murder of a 15-year-old kid named Jordan Edwards. He was a straight A student. He was into sports, and he was unfortunately in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was in a car full of other teenagers at a house party, leaving the party when a shooting happened that was gang-related across the street, unrelated. But the officers who were responding on scene to the house party ran out of the house, and it was dark. There he is on the screen. Looks like a very sweet, good kid, straight A student, like we said. So sad what happened. Anyway, now the question is whether or not it is murder and racially motivated or whether or not it was reasonable under the circumstances. We were listening to direct and cross-examination of Grant Fredericks. He's a video analyst. His testimony is key because, as usual, video is the best testimony, and this video is being played over and over and over and over for the jury because the video that is a body cam caught the moments leading up to the shooting. So this video has to be analyzed. What happened? What do you see? What's the time frame? We're going to play some footage of this video as well so you can see and analyze for yourself. With me also on set, there's the video you can see on set. With me is Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor. Francey, I want to give you the opportunity to make some comments here based on what you're seeing. Do you think that the jury thinks this is reasonable or excessive deadly force?
You know, Carissa, this is so interesting because this trial is going to rise and fall on this technology, these body cams. And one of the things that's, I think, on the prosecution side is that replaying these videos over and over again makes the jury lose the context that was the police officer's viewpoint that night. What did he hear? What did he know? What did he see? And the fact that he only had milliseconds to react.
And just to piggyback on that comment, one thing that we heard on cross-examination that he got an admission from this witness is, don't you agree that your perspective and that the officer's perspective and that the body cam's perspective are all different perspectives? Because the body cam, the camera is situated on a certain part of the body and that catches one thing, but where the officer is at eye level could be a totally different perspective.
That's right. And you never know where the officer is looking because the body cam doesn't reflect. It's not in his glasses, you know, like it is in movies. It's on his body somewhere, generally on his chest. So you can't see where the officer's looking, what he is seeing, or the urgency of the situation. That's the downfall of this technology. I mean, it's great to give us a view of what happened, but the bad part of this technology is that you do not get the emotion, the rush, the adrenaline, all the different inputs that are coming into an officer who has to make what he thinks is a split-second decision.
Right. Okay. And as we've said, the jury keeps watching this video over and over and over again. But now we're going to give the viewers an opportunity to watch this video in its entirety one more time. Here you go. Before we continue with our live coverage there, we're going to go to our top trending crime stories around the country. Let's take a look.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on lawandcrime.com and across the country. Authorities in New York City are looking for a man caught on surveillance camera stabbing another man in the neck after the two men accidentally bumped into each other. The video shows the moments a 55-year-old man was fatally slashed in the Bronx after the ill-fated walk-in with his attacker. The victim later died at St. Barnabas Hospital. Investigators are looking for the suspect and a second person of interest. Larry Nassar, the disgraced former USA gymnastics team doctor who sexually assaulted dozens of young girls, is being moved to another federal prison after reportedly being physically assaulted. Nassar's attorneys claim their client was assaulted soon after being released into the general prison population. Nassar is currently serving a 60-year sentence in federal prison to be followed by up to 175 years in state prison for his child pornography and sexual assault convictions. The teen who can be seen in this now viral video shoving another teen off of a bridge in Washington is now facing charges. 18-year-old Taylor Smith faces one count of reckless endangerment for pushing 16-year-old Jordan Holgerson off the bridge near Moulton Falls.
3,
No, I won't go in.
2.
Well, she's saying no.
No, I just...
Ready? Oh, that's so fast.
Holgerson suffered 5 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and air bubbles in her chest. Smith faces up to 364 days in jail and a $5,000 fine if convicted. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Thank you, Anthony. So she is facing 365 days in jail for that all fun and games type of move. Reckless endangerment is a crime consisting of acts that create a substantial risk of physical harm to another. There is no intent required. The question is, was it reckless? Francey Hakes, what do you think? Do you think this is all fun and games? I mean, she wanted to jump anyway. Does it matter that she was pushed? She was going to jump.
I think it does matter. And when you look at that video, the viciousness of that shove is, to me, all I need to see.
Was it vicious or is it kids playing?
Oh, I don't know. Did you see how hard that was? I mean, she pushed her.
She pushed her to make her go because supposedly she wanted to jump.
Well, and I have heard recently in the last couple of days an update. One of the news organizations reported that the victim reportedly asked her friend to push her. So I don't know if that's true or not. That could have a bearing.
So does the punishment fit the crime? Or is this all fun and games and a teenager is injured because another teenager was acting stupid? But really they're both acting stupid because she's standing there about to jump.
So you're asking, are we criminalizing stupid teen behavior? Maybe.
Maybe. There you go. Got the maybe. And that's why we have our legal system. There's arguments for both sides. Very good answer. Okay, we are now going to go back into the trial we've been covering. It is the case out of Texas, Roy Oliver, 2017 case where a former police officer is standing trial for the murder of a 15-year-old black kid, straight A student into sports. The question is, did the officer act reasonably? Not whether it was right or wrong, but was it reasonable or was it excessive force? That is the question for the jury to decide. Right now on the stand is Jeremy Seton. This is a friend of the victim. Jordan Edwards is the victim. Let's take a look. That is Grant Fredericks. He's a video analyst. He's still in the courtroom talking, and we are watching his testimony live. This is the case, for those of you just joining us, of Roy Oliver. It's out of Texas 2017 case where an officer is caught on body cam shooting and killing a 15-year-old black student, a straight A student. He's into sports, and the officer shot into a car full of teenagers leaving a house party. It all comes down to whether or not it was reasonable under the circumstances to shoot at this time. And since, other than some eyewitness testimony that we have heard, which was during the commotion of that night where it was dark, there were hundreds of high school students swarming on this house. There was a gang shooting across the street, a lot to consider. And now we have the video, which is in front of the jury over and over and over again, that the jury gets to analyze, and then they decide for themselves, was it reasonable or not? Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor. We have about a minute to talk about this. What are your thoughts so far?
Well, Carissa, the police body cam is excellent to have for a case like this, so that at least there's some context given the jury, the fact finder, in order to try to determine what was going on that Officer Oliver may have been thinking about before he pulled the trigger. And one of the things that's interesting is it's almost impossible to see inside that car. And I know there's been some allegation of some kind of racial animus here by Oliver, but it's dark outside, and the headlights, I think, are what the officers can see. I don't think they can see who's in that car.
Unless there's a lot of people at the party who were black, and, you know, the officers were already in the house, and maybe that was the scene of the night. Who knows? I don't know. We know that enough about that right now. We do have to take a quick break. We're going to continue with our live testimony and our in-studio analysis in just a few minutes. Stick with us. Welcome back. I'm Carissa Kranz. That was testimony from Grant Fredericks, the video analyst. That was cross-examination. And now the prosecution is back on redirect examination. The jury is certainly hearing and seeing and watching this video over and over and over again, and listening to this expert explain for both the prosecution and the defense what it means and his conclusory expert statements within that context. With me, Francey Hakes. Francey, I want to give you the opportunity to give your 2 cents on this because I think we need some help breaking it down. It's a little technical, isn't it?
It is a little technical, and I think it's interesting that the state has gone to the trouble, instead of just playing the video, pausing and stopping and starting wherever they want to. Instead, they've brought in this expert to talk about things like movement and where they were in relation to the vehicle into which Officer Oliver shot. The problem with evidence like this is it does give the defense a hole to drive through when it comes to technical factors. So he can talk about things like frame rates and what kind of light conditions allow for frame rates. And I can guarantee you that most of the people on the jury have tuned out by now. They're not listening anymore.
Well, it's not hard to tune out when you're listening to mundane, draconian evidence being said over and over again in the same video being played over and over again, which is just moments leading up to a shooting, when really the sensationalism is the actual screaming and the yelling and the firing of the shots and the shooting. I wish the cameras would actually turn towards the jury so we could see as viewers how they may or may not be processing it. Based on your experience, do you think that they're thinking this is reasonable, or are you thinking that this is excessive force?
Well, it's interesting at this point. I mean, we're still in the state's presentation of evidence. I think that jurors really do try to do their job and keep an open mind before they go back into the jury room to deliberate. And I think they're probably of 2 minds now. They have what looks like an unreasonable shooting. How could a cop fire into a car of unarmed teens without having a threat present? But you do have to take it all in context. I'm sure the jury's also focused on those 12 shots that were fired that caused the police to run out of the house and toward the car. And then they must be thinking, was this a gang drive-by shooting? And then you've got a car not obeying commands. So it's actually a relatively complicated case.
All good points. It is complicated. It was dark. With the camera, you see the body cam. You have a gang-related shooting. You have fights going off. You have kids swarming around a house. You have a party. It's late at night. Lots going on to consider. We must go to a quick break. Stick with us. We will be right back. Welcome back. I'm Carissa Kranz. As you can see, all rise. The judge is giving everyone a break. So that gives us the time to talk and have some in-studio analysis. Francey, let's dissect this, because every time we sit down and start to, we either have to go to a break or some riveting testimony is coming out on the stand that we need to listen to. What do you think so far? Do you think this is racially motivated? That's my first question.
I don't see the evidence of that, Carissa. I mean, I think we could see on the videotape that there were some black teenagers at that party. I certainly don't know the makeup of everyone that was at the party. We certainly know the victim was a black 15-year-old who was unarmed. But what we also saw in the video was that it was dark outside. It was, of course, nighttime, and the car headlights were right in the faces of the police officer. So I'm not sure whether or not this officer knew who was in the car that he was shooting into. I don't think the evidence on that has been clear yet.
Well, the evidence is never going to be clear. It's going to be up to the jury and the fact finder to decide. But some interesting facts to consider that we get to bring in as the media that sometimes does or does not get to be let into the court system. But if you read about this case, you can learn that Oliver, the officer, the former officer who's 38 years old, was a member of a group in middle school called Caucasians in Effect. It is a hate group. And court documents reveal that he was a member. Though he denies it, it is alleged that he was a member of this group where he carried at school a stun gun and a knife and publicly posted and drew swastikas on places. So while you can say this isn't racially motivated and it was dark and it's hard to draw conclusions, that little bit of evidence and piece of evidence that he was in part of a hate group that did not like black people and that this is a white officer in our Black Lives Matter movement makes a difference depending on what the composition of the jury is. Wouldn't you agree with that one, Francey?
Well, Carissa, you know, I just have to, you and I talked about this off the air. I just have to be a little concerned about being held responsible for the decisions that you made in middle school. I mean, I don't think I certainly don't think that's evidence the jury should hear. And to me, it isn't evidence that this police officer, as an adult, holds a racial animus. I can't draw that conclusion. Look, I do not support Nazis. I certainly don't support people who have a racial bias, but I just don't think you can hold someone accountable and say that they are a racist because of something they did or said in middle school.
Okay, so all good points, and that's why we're here to debate this. There really isn't a clear answer. The jury is going to have to listen to both sides. If it was clear, lots of times you have a plea and not a trial because the answer is clear. There's a trial because the facts need to be weighed, and that's what's being done, and we're here to help give analysis. So a couple other things to consider. The other officer already testified. We heard his testimony earlier today, and he said that he did not feel like his life was in danger at the time that those shots were fired, and therefore the conclusion to be drawn is that it was excessive force. What do you comment on that?
Well, Chris, I also understand that the defense impeached him and said that in at least one prior statement, he did say that he was in fear. So I don't know what the truth is. And of course, whether or not he was in fear is irrelevant to whether or not Officer Oliver thought he was in danger.
Has to be what's reasonable, right? What is it reasonable to be in fear at that moment? Thinking about it, I don't know. There's a gang shooting across the, you know, if I put myself in those shoes, there's so much, hindsight is always 20/20. And now we could sit here and replay this video over and over and say it was kids and it's not right and this innocent child died. But at the time, the neighborhood was obviously sketchy. There was a gang shooting across the street. There were hundreds of kids at a house party. It was late at night. You know that there's alcohol and probably pot and other substances involved. Who knows if there was gang members even in that house? You have two officers responding on scene. I don't think it's that unreasonable for two officers to feel outnumbered and acting and reacting quickly to gunshots, a whole series, 12 gunshots going off across the street. So maybe it was reasonable, even though the video and the analyst is saying that the car was definitely pointed away and the car was definitely moving away and that there was no imminent threat. hindsight's always 20/20, and that's a prosecution's witness. That's a hired gun for the prosecution.
He absolutely is. And another thing I think, Carissa, that's really important to remember is that we actually saw when we're playing that video in court, we saw other people, other kids walking around in front of or right next to the officers on their body cams. Oliver didn't shoot any of them. He didn't shoot anybody in the house or draw his weapon. He only started to engage in the kind of conduct that police do when he heard the shots and they ran outside, and then you've got chaos. And so at this point, I would have to say I'm not convinced that he acted unreasonably.
Me too, but in hindsight is, like we said, hindsight is always 20/20, but in hindsight, you know, the officer, why didn't he just shoot the tires of the car? He didn't want the car to move, so he didn't want the car to move. Why did he have to shoot into the car full of teenagers when he could have just demobilized the car by shooting the tires, and that could have solved the problem?
You know, Chris, I don't know where he was aiming. Frankly, when adrenaline is pumping, your hands are off.
I know, but officers should be trained.
He was actually shooting.
But officers should be better trained to respond and think quickly under those kinds of circumstances and have better control of their weapons, or they shouldn't become officers. And also in this case, I have an issue that this guy was holding the gun because 2 weeks prior to this, or 2 months or whatever it is, he has road rage incidences. We have to go to a quick break. We'll get right back to this, and we'll have more in-studio analysis. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. I want to finish the thought we started before that break. With me, Francey Hakes. We were discussing, and I want to round out the day finishing our thought. We were discussing the Roy Oliver trial out of Texas, the 2017 case where a former officer is standing trial because he shot and killed a 15-year-old teenager in the head. The question is, was it reasonable or was it excessive force under the circumstances? We have spent all day today debating that and listening to trial testimony, gavel to gavel, about this. And before the break, we were discussing whether or not this officer, in the frame of context, has a fair argument of whether or not this is reasonable or excessive force. And I was about to say that he also faces 2 counts of aggravated assault by a public servant for an unrelated road rage incident 2 weeks prior to this shooting. That is in addition to the facts that he also was a member of a Caucasian white hate group when he was in middle school, where he walked around with stun guns and knives and drew swastikas. So with that knowledge, which we get to disclose on the media, I wanted to have a final moment with you, the viewers, and with Francey to discuss that. How do you process that?
Well, Carissa, I think the most significant thing that I don't think the jury's going to hear, because I don't think the judge is going to let it in, is that road rage case. And to me, the judgment or lack of judgment and violent temper that this officer displayed in that incident should have meant that he was suspended. He should not have been carrying a gun. He should have at least been on desk duty. There's just simply no excuse for someone who is even alleged to have committed that kind of crime to be on active duty.
And also, with the whole Black Lives Matter movement and everything we see in the news, with officers and white officers and black kids or black people getting killed, there needs to be an investigation into the history of these officers before they are given the privilege of carrying a gun. Like in this case, the fact that there are allegations that he was a member of a white hate group, he should have never been given a gun. That is a matter of policy, not so much a matter of this case. We don't know what the jury is going to hear, but based on what the jury is hearing and based on that video, which you and I, Francey, have seen over and over and over today, but we haven't seen the jurors' response, do you think that the jurors think this is reasonable or excessive force? Mind you, the prosecution is still putting on its case, and we don't have the defense's arguments fully yet.
Well, Carissa, juries historically give police officers a great deal of deference in doing their job, and they understand that they have never been in that split-second danger decision-making that police officers routinely are. So I think the jury will pay him deference on his decision-making, but this is a tough case, I think, for the defense.
Well, and as always, the burden is on the prosecution to prove this case beyond any and all reasonable doubt. The defense does not have to prove anything. They just have to poke holes in the prosecution's case. And then the question is, is not whether it was right or wrong, because it doesn't matter if it was right or wrong. It matters whether or not it was reasonable. Francey, thank you for being with us. We have to go. Go to our website to watch the rest of this trial. It's live until 6 o'clock today.